Night has a way of listening that daylight will never learn. It listens with patience, with stillness, with that ancient monastic talent for absorbing every doubt, every sigh, every unspoken thought you try to hide from yourself. And on nights like this one, cold, candle-lit, trembling at the edges, you might even feel that the darkness is leaning in, waiting politely for you to confess something you didn't even intend to admit. But before we descend into the strange world of medieval monks and the rules that wrapped around their lives like vines, rules both sacred and absurd, holy and hilariously human, let me offer you a question as old as faith, as young as fear, as slippery as incense smoke rising through a chapel roof. What if the path to holiness is not a ladder, but a labyrinth? And what if those who walked it built their own walls without meaning to? Imagine that contradiction for a moment. Hold it gently, let it glow in your hands like a fragile coal. Because monks, those quiet, mysterious men of the Middle Ages, lived under rules so strange and specific that you could almost believe God himself spent his afternoons micromanaging their sneeze schedules. And yet, beneath every rule, every vow, every ritual gesture, repeated until it carved grooves into their souls, lay a trembling fear. The fear that faith, left unattended, might wander off. Yes, wander, like a distracted sheep, or a philosopher in a field who forgets where he left his shoes. So they built rules, endless rules, glorious rules. Rules crafted from devotion, superstition, hope, panic, boredom, and the deeply human desire to control the uncontrollable. And tonight, you and I, you, with your quiet breath in the dark, and I, with my candle-lit voice drifting through your room, we will walk gently into that world. The world where a monk could spend 40 years trying to avoid dropping crumbs on the wrong day of the liturgical calendar. The world where humility was measured, catalogued, and occasionally weaponized. The world where silence spoke louder than sermons, and where spiritual confusion was so common it might as well have been written into the rule of Saint Benedict. But before you convince yourself that this is just gentle background noise for sleep, let me whisper a tiny invitation, half blessing, half warning, entirely sincere. If you feel the faint tug of something ancient and curious, if the night feels a bit too alive, if your soul opens just a fraction like a door with a loose hinge, then pause for a moment and do your small part. Like this video and subscribe. Not because the algorithm demands it. No. Tonight we speak only of higher powers. Do it because some lights, digital or divine, shine brighter when you choose them. Now breathe slowly. Let the quiet settle around you. Let the shadows lean closer. Let the air grow heavy with incense, dust, and half-forgotten prayers. Imagine a monastery. Not the postcard kind, no cheerful daylight, no well-fed monks strolling around with gentle smiles. No, picture a monastery built of stone so old it remembers voices that no human ear has heard in centuries. Walls soaked with candle smoke, floor tiles worn down by thousands of hesitant steps. A place where time moves differently, stretching and folding like the fabric of a dream. The halls are narrow, cold, still. Your footsteps would echo in them the way doubts echo in a sleepless heart. In one of these halls, long, dim, and lined with flickering candles whose flames tilt as though gossiping, you find a small wooden door. You might not notice it at first. It blends in. It apologizes for existing. But push it open, and you enter a tiny stone cell where a solitary monk sits cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in a robe the color of dusk. This monk is our guide, not a saint, not a sinner, just a man who has prayed himself into a corner. His hands are folded in his lap, fingers intertwined like tangled rosary beads. His face, pale, thin, illuminated by the trembling candlelight, carries that expression monks specialize in, a perfect mixture of serenity, exhaustion, confusion, and mild, holy dread, as if he lives each day expecting God to speak, and fearing that God already did, but too quietly for him to catch the words. His name does not matter yet. Names are luxuries. Tonight, he is simply the one who listened too closely. He sits surrounded by the remnants of a life carried out according to ancient rules. A wooden bowl, a single thin blanket, a wooden cross carved so simply that even humility would feel overdressed wearing it. The air tastes faintly of dust, ink, and the lingering regret of old prayers. Listen closely. There, the soft scratch of quill against parchment. There, the faint rustle of his robe as he shifts his weight. There, the tiny crackle of candle flame dancing like a tired seraph. And under all of that, beneath the layers of ritual and silence, a question he cannot silence. A question about faith and doubt and the strangeness of living a life micromanaged by both God and human imagination. A question that glows inside him like a secret ember waiting for breath. It is this question, this trembling thing inside a man who has given everything to certainty, that opens tonight's story. A story about monks who built rules so intricate they accidentally constructed spiritual labyrinths inside themselves. A story about devotion so profound it curled in on itself like smoke. A story about the quiet, ironic comedy of human beings trying to impose order on the infinite. Our monk, yes, this quiet figure sitting in the half-dark, this man whose soul hums like a harp string pulled too tightly, does not yet know he stands at the edge of a small, sacred disaster. He does not know that tonight something will shift. He does not know that one thought will enter him, like a needle slipping into cloth. He does not know that his faith, so carefully tended, so neatly arranged, so obediently maintained, is about to do something profoundly inconvenient. It is about to question itself. But for now, he breathes. He prays. He tries to still the restlessness moving beneath his ribs. And outside his tiny window the night presses in, curious, patient, ancient, waiting for the story to begin. So let us walk with him. Let us follow the candlelit corridors. Let us enter the heart of a monastery where the walls have absorbed so many whispered fears they practically hum with them. Let us begin the tale of the strange rules medieval monks lived by, a tale of faith that trembles, silence that speaks, and irony so ancient it might as well be scripture. Now, before the candle burns any lower, before the night grows any deeper, tell me, when dawn finally crept across the edges of the world, it did so reluctantly, as though even the sun questioned whether it should disturb the fragile tension inside the monastery. Morning light seeped into the corridor like a thin ribbon, pale and patient, illuminating particles of dust that drifted through the air with the quiet confidence of tiny monks fulfilling ancient duties. The monastery woke not with noise, but with the soft choreography of habit. Sandals sliding over stone, robes brushing one another with sleepy dignity. A distant cough from a man who believed in silence, but not in resisting bronchial rebellion. And somewhere, deep within the building's lungs, a bell began to ring. Ah, the bell, the monastery's stern, metallic conscience. It rang with the authority of centuries, telling the monks to rise, pray, live, repent, and, for reasons no one remembered, avoid consuming dairy before sunrise. The bell was the monastery's true abbot, unblinking and incorruptible, a voice from heaven forged by human hands. Brother Aurelius, yes, let us now give him a name, opened his eyes to the thin light cutting across his cell. He did not wake dramatically. Monks do not gasp, bolt upright, or fling blankets aside. They emerge from sleep the way old books emerge from shelves, slowly, with a quiet dignity that smells faintly of dust. He blinked at the ceiling, which stared back with the blank indifference only medieval stone can achieve. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested he was already tired of the day, despite the day not having started. He rose from his bed, a straw mattress thin enough to ensure humility without accidentally killing anyone, and wrapped himself in his robe. The fabric was coarse, dyed in the traditional shade of holy brown, a color chosen because it reminded monks of dirt, earth, simplicity, and the eternal illusion that suffering builds character. As Aurelius stepped into the corridor, the cold stone embraced his feet with that special monastic kind of chill that encourages spiritual alertness or hypothermia, depending on the individual. The hallway stretched before him, narrow and dim, lit by candles that flickered as though unsure whether they wanted to keep existing. Each flame offered a tiny circle of trembling gold, surrounded by a vast sea of patient shadow. He walked with slow, careful steps, part reverence, part exhaustion, part desire not to stub his toe on an uneven stone. Medieval architecture had many virtues, but flat floors were not among them. As Aurelius moved through the corridor, he breathed in the familiar, layered scent of monastery life. Old parchment candle wax, heated to the edge of burning cold stone, soaking up centuries' herbs, drying near the kitchen, and that faint undertone of incense that lingers long after prayers have evaporated. This was his world, a world of structure, silence, repetition, and uneasy grace. He entered the chapel with the other monks, each one shuffling to his assigned place, like solemn chess pieces in a divine game no one could fully explain. Aurelius knelt, the cold seeping into his bones with the persistent courtesy of an old friend. The chant began, low, droning, ancient, voices rising and falling like a long breath of humanity, trying very hard to sound holy before breakfast. Aurelius joined in, though his voice carried the slight tremor of someone singing hymns more out of muscle memory than revelation. He wasn't always like this. In his earlier years, he prayed with that eager brightness unique to novices, eyes shining, heart lifted, mind full of hope that God was paying close attention. But age, routine, and the slow erosion of unquestioned faith had dulled that brilliance. Now his prayers were softer, quieter, more uncertain. He still believed. Of course he believed. But his faith no longer marched confidently. It shuffled. It paused. It tripped occasionally on its own robe. After prayer, the monks filed into the refectory, a long hall lined with wooden benches that carried the dents of thousands of meals and a few overly enthusiastic elbows. Morning porridge steamed from large clay bowls, plain, gray, virtuous, and aggressively humble. No monk had ever eaten it without wondering if holiness and flavor were natural enemies. Aurelius took his portion and sat in silence. Silence was the default setting of monastic life. Speech was allowed only at specific times, for specific reasons, with specific words, under the supervision of specific senior monks trained in the ancient art of spiritual small talk. Aurelius ate slowly, staring at his porridge with the contemplative intensity of a philosopher studying the mysteries of the universe. His spoon dipped into the bowl in slow, rhythmic movements, soft, controlled, reverent, as though scooping answers that stubbornly refused to appear. When breakfast ended, he walked to the scriptorium, his assigned duty for the day. The scriptorium, that sacred sanctuary of ink and dust, was a room where monks copied manuscripts with the dedication of men who feared divine consequences for sloppy handwriting. Light filtered through narrow windows, casting long beams that illuminated floating specks like drifting celestial dust. Shelves of parchment and ink pots lined the walls. The smell of ink, metallic, earthy, immortal, filled the air. Aurelius sat at his desk, dipped his quill into ink, and began copying a passage about the virtues of obedience. His strokes were precise, practiced, but lacking enthusiasm. He wrote each word with the care of someone who respected truth, but no longer felt intimately acquainted with it. He looked at the words. Obedience is a path to clarity. Clarity is a path to peace. Peace is the reward of the obedient. He paused. If that were true, he thought, shouldn't he feel clearer by now? But thought was dangerous. Thought was a wandering animal that monks tried to keep tethered. Thought was the first step toward asking questions, and questions were the first step toward disaster. He forced the doubt aside and resumed writing. Throughout the day, Aurelius observed the small, ironic contradictions of monastic life, with the quiet humor of someone who loved the monastery, even as he recognized its absurdities. He watched Brother Elias sweep the same spot of floor for the third time, convinced dust had a spiritual agenda. He heard Brother Matthias muttering a confession about accidentally smiling too warmly at a novice. He noticed Brother Ignatius adjusting his robe with such stern modesty it bordered on vanity. Monks were human, after all, beautifully human, tragically human, accidentally comedic in their pursuit of perfection. As the sun crossed the sky, casting long shadows that crawled across stone walls like dark fingers searching for meaning, Aurelius felt that familiar pull inside him, a quiet ache, a restless hum, a sense of something unresolved stirring beneath the surface of his soul. He brushed the feeling aside, again, but it clung to him like a question whispered too close to the ear. By late afternoon, the air grew colder. The monastery darkened. Candles flickered to life in corners, and Aurelius felt that strange inner heaviness again, as though some hidden part of him was gathering strength, preparing to reveal itself. When evening prayer came, he knelt with the others. He bowed his head. He whispered the sacred words. But something was off. Not wrong. Not broken. Just slightly misaligned, like a painting hanging one fraction of an inch off center. He tried to ignore it, but the feeling persisted. A quiet pressure behind the ribs, a silence that hummed, an unease that asked nothing and yet demanded everything. Aurelius closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and wondered briefly, painfully, whether the life he had built on certainty was beginning to tremble. The bell rang. Night fell. Monks dispersed into darkness. Aurelius returned to his cell, sat on the straw bed, and stared at the candle flame trembling at the edge of its wick. And the thought returned, soft, persistent, uninvited, a thought that would become the seed of everything that followed. A thought he was not yet ready to name, but the night, ancient, patient, curious, waited for him, as it always does. Now tell me, before the first crack appears in a man's faith, before the first whisper of doubt threads itself through the mind like a shadow passing over a candle, there is a time, strangely golden, when belief feels effortless, not because it is simple, but because it is unquestioned, Brother Aurelius remembered that time the way one remembers the quiet warmth of childhood mornings, not through details, but through atmosphere. His early years in the monastery glowed with a sense of spiritual certainty so complete it bordered on innocence. He believed in God with the uncalculated enthusiasm of someone who had never considered the possibility that belief could tremble. His prayers rose from him like breath, natural and constant. His faith felt sturdy, like a stone column carved by centuries of devotion, impervious to weather, time, or personal crisis. He believed boldly, wholeheartedly, naively. But belief, for Aurelius, was never loud. It was a soft, steady thing, a warmth under the ribs, a quiet directionality in the soul. He did not think of himself as holy. No monk did. That would have been far too convenient. But he thought of himself as aligned, facing toward the divine, the way flowers face the sun without knowing why. In those early years, he saw miracles everywhere, not dramatic ones, but small, comfortable ones, the spiritual equivalent of finding an extra slice of bread when you were certain the loaf was gone. The sun rising over the monastery roof felt like a whispered blessing. The sound of morning chant swelling in the chapel seemed like the breath of angels hovering just beyond the rafters. Even the simple act of sweeping the cloister walkway felt infused with purpose, as though clearing dust from a stone contributed to clearing sin from the world. He believed with the kind of gentle fervor that does not burn but glows, the kind of faith that warms hands on cold mornings, the kind of faith that keeps a man upright even when his spine is tired. He prayed often, more than often, constantly, not because he feared punishment, but because prayer felt like breathing in a world where the air was slightly too thin. It filled the gaps between moments. It held him steady. It played like soft music behind the long hours of discipline and silence. He liked praying. He liked the rhythm of it, the way words repeated themselves until meaning dissolved and something else, something quieter and older, took their place. He liked the sense of being held by something unseen, of stepping into a stream that had been flowing long before he was born and would continue long after he vanished into dust. And besides, faith offered certainty, and certainty was a kind of luxury, a quiet one, a warm one, a luxury that perhaps no one realizes they possess until they feel it begin to slip. In the early years, Aurelius believed everything with a poetic calmness that would later seem both beautiful and slightly absurd. He believed the saints listened. He believed angels intervened. He believed divine order held everything together, from the movement of the stars to the availability of vegetables in the monastery garden. He even believed quietly but sincerely that the bell ringing at dawn was not just metal on metal, but God's way of saying, "Rise, Aurelius, I am still here." He believed in spiritual cause and effect. He believed that every prayer sent upward had a shelf in heaven. He believed that every moment of obedience was counted and recorded by celestial scribes with impeccable handwriting. He believed that every act of humility, every bowed head, every silent meal, every night spent shivering under a thin blanket, brought him infinitesimally closer to divine clarity. But, and this is where the irony begins, Aurelius did not believe with arrogance. No, he believed with the soft, earnest humility of someone who could not imagine faith failing, because he had simply never encountered the possibility. His heart had not yet learned the weight of questions. He had not yet experienced silence that felt like abandonment, or prayer that fell inward instead of rising upward, or that peculiar spiritual nausea that comes when the soul senses something is shifting beneath it. He had not yet met the kind of doubt that arrives like a polite guest, sits at the table, sips tea, and then refuses to leave. Back then, he believed in miracles the way one believes in seasonal weather, with mild expectation and gentle gratitude. He believed in divine timing, though he could never define it. He believed in heavenly intervention, even when it came disguised as coincidence. He believed God spoke through dreams, through scripture, through silence, through the way a candle flickered at just the right moment. His mentors admired his devotion. They gently teased him for his seriousness. Even the abbot once remarked, half proud and half ironic, Aurelius prays with the sincerity of a man trying to impress God, who is notoriously difficult to impress. Aurelius took that as a compliment. His world back then was ordered, neat, symmetrical, like a cathedral floor plan drawn by a meticulous architect who hated surprises. Faith was a balance, a structure, a scaffolding, and he trusted it completely. He trusted that prayer worked precisely. He trusted that penance cleaned the soul with mechanical efficiency. He trusted that obedience produced light the way friction produces heat. He trusted that the rule book he followed, long, intricate, occasionally absurd, was a map handed down from heaven. He believed with such serenity that he never noticed how delicate his certainty truly was, how fragile, how dependent on routines remaining unbroken, how vulnerable to a single moment of silence that does not feel like silence should. He believed with a kind of spiritual innocence, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he lacked interruption. And that is the tragedy of serene faith. It never suspects that one night, one candle flicker, one strange dream, one unanswered prayer, could unravel everything. But he did not know any of this yet, not in those peaceful years when he walked the monastery halls with a steady gaze, believing God watched him with equal steadiness. Not in those quiet dawns when he felt clarity pour through him like warm water. Not in those long afternoons spent copying scripture, savoring every stroke of the quill as though each letter was a tiny rung in a ladder toward heaven. Not in those sleepless nights when he felt wrapped in a presence so soft he believed it would last forever. He did not know how fragile serenity was. He did not know how little it takes to fracture a soul. He did not know that faith, like glass, can be both transparent and breakable. He did not know that beneath the surface of his devotion, a tiny seed of doubt, unborn, silent, unseen, waited with the patience of a stone. And oh, how patient doubt can be! Patient enough to wait for one quiet moment, one unexpected thought, one trembling breath, before it begins its slow, haunting bloom. The kind of bloom that changes everything. Doubt never enters through the front door. It prefers cracks, tiny ones, unnoticed at first, invisible until you feel the cold air slipping in. That is how it began for Brother Aurelius. Not with a thunderclap, not with temptation, not with some grand philosophical crisis, but with something so humble, so embarrassingly small, that he would later look back and wonder how such a quiet moment managed to dismantle a life of prayer. It started with a sneeze. Yes, a sneeze, because the universe has a sense of humor, and God, if he was taking notes that night, was certainly smirking behind a celestial sleeve. It was late. The hallways were asleep with their own echoes. Monks had retreated to their cells for the great silence, a nightly ritual in which not even thoughts were supposed to be loud. The candles flickered weakly, breathing their last before surrendering to the dark. Aurelius sat cross-legged on the floor of his small stone cell, reading an old manuscript on spiritual vigilance. The text was stern, unforgiving, and utterly convinced that the human soul, like a misbehaving goat, would run wild unless tethered by constant self-supervision. Aurelius believed every word. Then he felt it. A tickle, a tremor in the nose, a warning of the kind of sneeze that does not ask permission. He panicked. Medieval monks, after all, had rules for everything. Rules for waking up, rules for eating, rules for silence, rules for carrying bread, rules for adjusting one's hood, and yes, rules for sneezing after sunset. Rule 47, subsection C. If a brother sneezes after the sun descends, he must whisper the invocation of purity, lest the enemy exploit his moment of bodily vulnerability. A rule clearly written by a monk, who believed demons lurked in nasal passages. Aurelius, being dutiful, prepared himself. He closed his eyes. He pressed a finger beneath his nose. He inhaled through his mouth like a struggling fish. He whispered half of the invocation, and then he sneezed, violently, spectacularly, sinfully, before finishing the sacred words. He froze. His eyes shot open. His heart thudded. He waited for something, a sign, a reprimand, a supernatural flick of divine disapproval, a burning sensation that monks always seemed to get whenever they feared they'd displease the heavens. But nothing happened. Nothing. Not a sound, not a whisper, not a single flicker from the candle flame. Aurelius sat very still, as if trying to look innocent in front of an all-seeing, all-knowing, possibly amused God. Then a thought slipped into his mind. A tiny thought, a forbidden thought, a thought more dangerous than fire in a library. What if the rule doesn't matter? He blinked. The room swayed slightly. The candle flame leaned to the left as though startled. He shook his head, trying to throw the thought away like a piece of lint clinging to his robe. "No," he whispered. "The rule matters. The rule always matters." But the thought had already rooted itself. Small, silent, impossible to undo. He looked around the cell as if expecting divine intervention to burst through the walls, like a dramatic instructor correcting a student's posture. Nothing. And in that nothing, the thought grew. What if God doesn't micromanage sneezes? His breath caught. Because if God didn't micromanage sneezes, what else didn't he micromanage? Was every rule truly divine? Were they all necessary? Had he spent years obeying instructions written by men who were simply very enthusiastic about restrictions? He tried to push the questions away. He tried to drown them in prayer. He knelt. He clasped his hands. He whispered every sacred word he knew. He invented new words. He apologized for the possibility of thinking the wrong thing. He apologized for apologizing incorrectly. He apologized for existing. But the silence in the room felt thicker than before. Not empty, not hollow, but watchful. As though the silence itself was leaning in, interested in how Aurelius would handle this tiny crack in his certainty. He stood abruptly and paced the cell. His bare feet tapped soft patterns against cold stone. His robe swished like restless wings. His heart raced with the frantic energy of a man who knows something has shifted inside him but cannot name the shift without making it real. He needed distraction. He reached for a manuscript on the table. It slipped from his fingers and fell open on the floor. A single pebble cracked loose from the wall and landed beside it. Aurelius jumped. The pebble, round and unimpressive, lay innocently on the floor. Aurelius stared at it. Hard. Too hard. In monastic life, nothing is allowed to be just a pebble. Everything is metaphor. Everything is symbol. Everything is a test or a blessing or a warning or the shadow of a deeper truth hiding beneath mundane surfaces. He knelt, picked up the pebble, and held it in his palm like a relic. "What do you mean?" he whispered to it. The pebble said nothing. Rude, really. He squeezed it gently. He shook it. He turned it over. Still nothing. He sighed deeply and put it on the table. But inside him something shifted again, not an earthquake, not even a tremor, just a soft tilt in the foundation of his faith. He returned to his bed, sat heavily, and stared at the candle flame. It flickered with an indecisive wobble, as if mimicking his thoughts. He whispered, "Lord, if you wish to correct me, now would be an excellent time." Silence. He whispered again, "Or reassure me." Silence. He tried a third time. Just a small sign. The candle crackled faintly. Aurelius inhaled sharply. Was that a sign? Or just wax being wax? And here, in this ambiguity, in this space between certainty and confusion, the seed of doubt settled deeper. Doubt never shouts. It whispers. It begins not as a declaration, but as a possibility that rules might be human, that rituals might be habit, that silence might be silence. Not divine language, not punishment, not approval, just silence. And silence, for the first time in Aurelius's life, felt like something he could not interpret. A dangerous feeling for a monk. His eyes lowered, his body sagged, his breath slowed. The thought returned, soft but sharp. What if my faith depends on rules more than truth? What if I know the rituals but not the reality? What if I don't understand anything at all? The thought echoed inside his skull like footsteps in an abandoned cloister. He lay down, unable to resist the weight of his unraveling thoughts. The candle burned low. Its flame grew thin. Its light grew tired. Aurelius closed his eyes. The last thing he saw was a faint glow behind the lids, a glow he could no longer trust to be divine, or merely the afterimage of fire. And so the seed of doubt, planted quietly by a sneeze and watered by silence, settled deep inside him. Invisible, growing, waiting. Morning arrived with a brightness that felt a little too confident, as though the sun had decided to compensate for Aurelius's inner darkness by being aggressively cheerful. Light spilled into his cell like a guest who had not been invited, but insisted on making itself useful. It illuminated everything. The rough stone walls, the wooden cross above the bed, the scattered manuscripts, and, of course, the pebble he had interrogated the night before. Aurelius stared at it. The pebble stared back. Neither blinked. And then, with the shaky determination of a man performing spiritual CPR on himself, Aurelius declared, silently but firmly, "Today will be normal. I will make it normal. I will pray harder, louder, longer, if needed. I will outrun the doubt. Deny it. Crush it. Smother it under an avalanche of holy enthusiasm." He sat upright, inhaled a righteous breath, and immediately began over-praying. You see, monks have a special way of overcompensating. They do the right things with such excessive conviction that even saints would raise an eyebrow. Aurelius clasped his hands so tightly, his knuckles turned pale, as if he were trying to strangle the concept of uncertainty. His morning prayer had vigor, too much vigor. The kind of vigor that says, if I smile hard enough, the universe will believe me. He whispered the Psalms at triple speed, as though outrunning invisible doubts that chased behind him like stray dogs. He bowed so deeply his forehead nearly dented the floor. He murmured extra blessings, unnecessary ones, invented ones, grammatically questionable ones. He even corrected his own posture twice, because surely poor alignment offended God. When he stood, he felt dizzy, spiritually impressive, physically unwise. In the corridor, He walked with artificial purpose. His steps were brisk, confident, borderline dramatic, like a monk auditioning for the role of most stable soul in the building. He nodded at other brothers with an expression meant to say, "Everything is fine," but which actually said, "I am begging you not to look inside my skull right now." The monks greeted him peacefully, too peacefully. Their calm only made Aurelius's frantic serenity worse. Brother Ignatius offered a simple blessing. "Peace of the morning be upon you." Aurelius, panicking slightly, responded, "And upon your morning, your noon, your evening, your livestock, and the entire concept of peace itself." Ignatius blinked. Aurelius hurried away. At breakfast, he spooned porridge into his mouth with heroic determination. He chewed like a man proving something. What exactly, he did not know. Brother Elias sat beside him and whispered, "You seem very energized today." Aurelius froze mid-chew. "Do I?" he said, smiling so hard his face twitched. "Yes," Elias said gently. "Is something troubling you?" "No, absolutely not. Nothing troubles me. I am a well of tranquility. I am a river of peace. I am a mountain of unwavering." He choked on his porridge. A subtle but undeniable blow to dignity. Elias patted his back sympathetically. Aurelius coughed and muttered, "Thank you. I am fine. Perfectly fine." Yet even as he said it, he felt the fragile scaffolding of denial wobbling. After breakfast came manual labor, the great spiritual equalizer. Aurelius swept the courtyard with such force that dust rose around him in a resentful cloud. His broom strokes were fast, intense, borderline aggressive. "Lord," he whispered, "if you saw any doubt in me yesterday, please note how vigorously I am sweeping today." The wind, unhelpfully, blew more dust onto the stones he had just cleaned. Aurelius frowned and swept harder. The wind continued its quiet sabotage. It felt personal. Brother Lucian walked by and observed, "You're sweeping the same place repeatedly." "Yes," Aurelius replied with manic brightness, "for thoroughness." "Is thoroughness the goal?" Lucian asked kindly, "or distraction?" Aurelius smiled too deeply again. "My brother, what an interesting question. I shall meditate on it while sweeping everything in sight." Lucian nodded, unconvinced. The day continued in this unhinged spirit. In the scriptorium, Aurelius copied scriptures with unnecessary flourish. His quill danced like a feathered acrobat, producing strokes so ornamental they bordered on flamboyant. Brother Hilarius leaned over, studying the overly decorative letters. "That verse is supposed to be solemn," Hilarius whispered. "It is solemn," Aurelius insisted. "It looks festive," Hilarius whispered back. Aurelius added even more flourishes, because nothing says, "I am stable," like aggressively stylish calligraphy. Next came noon prayer, and here is where everything began to crumble. The monks knelt in perfect rows, heads bowed, hands folded. The chant rose like a disciplined wave. Aurelius joined, forcing his voice to sound calm, confident, pious, until he heard it. A tremor, a tiny crack in the sound of his own chanting. His voice wavered, just a little, barely noticeable. But to Aurelius it sounded like a theological earthquake. His eyes widened, his chest tightened, his pulse quickened. The chant continued smoothly around him, but he felt suddenly out of sync, like a stone dropped into the wrong river. He tried to steady the tremor, but his throat betrayed him. One microsecond of wavering faith made physical. Panic surged. He tried to compensate by singing louder, then entirely too loud. Brother Matthias beside him flinched. Brother Hugo peeked over. Even the abbot opened one eye. Aurelius realized what he was doing and abruptly lowered his voice, then overcorrected and whispered too softly, then panicked again and landed in a weird middle volume that conveyed guilt more than devotion. When the prayer ended, he remained kneeling for a moment, sweating in gentle monastic agony. "I am fine," he told himself. "I am absolutely fine. Nothing is wrong." His mind disagreed. His breathing disagreed. His trembling fingers disagreed. Denial works beautifully, right up until reality taps you on the shoulder with a single trembling note in a sacred chant. He rose slowly, trying to regain composure. But life, sensing weakness, decided to test him again. As the monks filed out of the chapel, Aurelius's robe caught on a wooden bench. He stumbled. Just slightly, just enough. Not enough to fall, but enough to snap something small and quiet inside him. He stood still. Too still. Like a man realizing that no amount of sweeping, praying, chanting, or decorative calligraphy can force the universe to pretend everything is fine. He walked out into the cloister garden, heart beating in weak, uneven pulses. The sunlight was soft. The olive tree swayed gently. The world seemed perfectly calm. And that calmness, that maddening calmness, felt like spiritual mockery. He sat on a stone bench, gripping the edge as if the earth might tilt. His denial, brilliant and desperate, had begun to crack. He whispered, "Lord, I am trying, truly trying. I am doing everything." The silence that followed was not hostile, not angry, just indifferent. And indifference is a terrifying answer to a desperate question. Aurelius swallowed hard. He pressed a hand to his chest. That tiny seed of doubt, from the sneeze, the pebble, the silence, felt suddenly heavier. He whispered, "I still believe. I do. I must." But belief, strained, forced, stretched thin, felt like a rope beginning to fray. The denial was failing. The truth was coming. Something was approaching, softly, slowly, inevitably, and Aurelius could feel it, like a shadow lengthening at sunset. The next morning greeted Brother Aurelius not with clarity, but with the distinct feeling that the universe had developed a sense of humor at his expense. Dawn arrived in a soft, pale wash of light that looked apologetic, an embarrassed sunrise that seemed to whisper, "I tried," without offering further explanation. Aurelius rose from his straw bed with the slow, reluctant motion of a man already exhausted by the idea of existing. He rubbed his eyes, blinked at the ceiling, and promised himself, quietly, firmly, that today he would not overreact. Today he would look for signs of reassurance, not signs of destruction. The universe loved nothing more than a man hoping for clarity. It provided the opposite immediately. His first test came at breakfast. The bowl of porridge placed before him was ordinary, gray, bland, spiritually humbling, but the slice of bread beside it was not. The bread was burnt, very burnt. Burnt in a way that suggested Brother Matteo had once again drifted into mystical contemplation while baking. Aurelius lifted the slice and froze, because the charred surface of the bread had a face. Not a clear face, not a divine face, not even an impressive face. Just a face-shaped pattern of blackened crumbs, ambiguous enough to be holy or human, or purely carb-based coincidence. Aurelius stared at it. The bread stared back smugly. Could it be a saint? Could it be an omen? Could it be Brother Matteo himself in symbolic carbohydrate form? He squinted, tilted his head, held it nearer to the candlelight. Brother Elias, noticing, leaned over and whispered, "It looks like a donkey with indigestion." Aurelius's stomach dropped. He wasn't sure whether that made the situation better or worse. He ate the bread reluctantly, chewing around the face-like pattern with the reverence of a man trying not to offend potential divine carbart. The second sign came during his morning duty in the scriptorium. Aurelius reached for a scroll on the upper shelf, and a loose sheet fluttered down, gentle, slow, as if descending with purpose. It landed on his desk, blank, completely blank. Not a stroke of ink, not a faded letter, nothing. Just pure, unblemished emptiness staring up at him. He swallowed hard. In monastic symbolism, blank pages meant many things: purity, humility, God's silence, or inexplicably poor record-keeping. Aurelius touched the page gently, half expecting a message to appear if he made physical contact. Some whisper from the divine, some gentle revelation written in invisible ink. Nothing. Brother Hilarius walked by, saw the blank sheet, and nodded sagely. "A sign," he whispered. "Of what?" Aurelius asked, hopefully. Hilarius shrugged. "Something," and walked away. Aurelius buried his face in his hands. The third sign arrived in the courtyard. He was sweeping, again, because monks sweep the way birds migrate, instinctively and without ever questioning the point. The broom stroked the stone floor in long, slow arcs. The dust rose in little clouds, forming patterns he tried very hard not to interpret as omens. Then a breeze drifted through the courtyard. A single dry leaf lifted from the ground and floated toward him. It twirled, danced, hovered in the air with suspicious grace, then landed directly on Aurelius's foot. He picked it up. The leaf had a shape, a very unhelpful shape, possibly a heart, possibly a fish, possibly the profile of a discouraged camel. He turned it over. No revelations. Just a leaf being deeply uncooperative about its symbolic duties. "Lord," Aurelius whispered to the leaf, "if you are sending me a message, please remember I am terrible at metaphors." The leaf remained inscrutable. The fourth sign came during midday prayer. As the monks chanted, a small spider descended from the ceiling on a thin silver thread. It dangled in front of Aurelius's face, slow, deliberate, judgmental. The spider seemed to hover exactly at eye level, like a tiny spiritual supervisor checking his posture. Aurelius stared. The spider stared back. Brother Matthias noticed and whispered, "A messenger from heaven." Aurelius whispered back, "It has 8 legs." "Divine efficiency," Matthias said solemnly. The spider continued its slow descent, then stopped, deciding, apparently, that this was a good place to observe human collapse. Aurelius felt vaguely insulted. The fifth sign came during supper. Aurelius reached for his cup of water. The surface rippled. Once, twice, 3 times. His breath caught. Was it a warning? A miracle? A sign of divine displeasure? He held his breath, staring at the cup like it was a holy oracle. Then he glanced under the table. Brother Hilarius was nervously bouncing his leg. So, not a mystical tremor, just human fidgeting. Aurelius sighed with the defeated dignity of a man trapped between heaven and someone else's poor muscle control. But the 6th sign, the worst sign, came at night. As Aurelius returned to his cell, candle in hand, the flame flickered violently, not softly, not poetically, aggressively. The flame bent sideways, then shot upward, then shrank into a trembling pinprick. Aurelius froze. His breath caught. This was the same kind of flicker that had haunted him on the night of the sneeze, the night his certainty had loosened its grip. He held the candle closer to his face, studying the flame as though interrogating it. The flame shifted again, quivered, shivered, not communicating, not revealing, just behaving like fire, which was somehow worse, because the uncertainty gnawed at him. Was it a sign, or was it nothing? Or, most terrifying of all, was it both? He sat on his bed, candle in hand, watching the flame move with delicate chaos. Every shift, every tremble, every thin twist of fire repeated the same message. You do not know. You cannot know. You are trying too hard to know. Aurelius whispered, Lord, I beg you, please stop sending me ambiguous signals. Or if you must send them in clearer handwriting. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Familiar. A silence with its own gravity. It filled the room like a presence, pressing gently against his thoughts. Aurelius lowered the candle. The flame steadied. He inhaled. For a moment, just a moment, he felt calm. Then the flame flickered again, and Aurelius whispered, exhausted, Very well. I see how this is going to be. He blew out the candle. Darkness bloomed. The signs had not helped. They had only deepened the labyrinth. And somewhere, in the hollows of that dark cell, doubt stretched its limbs. Slow, patient, comfortable now in its new home. By the next dawn, something inside Brother Aurelius had shifted in a way he could no longer ignore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even entirely noticeable to anyone but him. But it was there, a subtle misalignment, as if his soul had been placed back inside him at the wrong angle. He woke before the bell rang, staring at the ceiling, aware of the silent heaviness pressing against his ribs. Sleep had not refreshed him. It had merely paused the unraveling. Now, in the cold, gray hint of morning, the unraveling resumed with renewed enthusiasm. He sat up slowly, his joints creaking with the modest theatricality of a monk who had spent too many nights wrestling with invisible thoughts. He dressed without ceremony, his robe feeling heavier than usual, as though doubt had stitched itself into the fabric overnight. The corridor outside his cell was dim, lit only by thin threads of dawn trying to slip in past ancient stone. The familiar smell of damp walls and cold air greeted him, but instead of comfort, he felt an odd distance, like he was walking through a place that looked exactly like his home, but was somehow off. As he approached the chapel, he realized he was bracing himself, not for prayer, but for silence. It awaited him like a patient predator. He knelt with the others. The stone floor greeted his knees with its usual indifference. The chant began, long, slow notes stretching across the air like monks attempting to harmonize with eternity. But Aurelius felt nothing. Not calm, not reverence, not even the faint warmth of habit, just emptiness. A hollow quiet that echoed inside him like a well with no water. He tried to sing. His mouth formed the words, but the sound emerging from him felt thin, strained, artificial. His voice did not rise. It wavered, like a candle struggling against a breeze that was not there. He closed his eyes, searching for something, anything, to anchor himself to. A flicker of grace, a whisper of presence, a familiar warmth in the chest. Nothing. Prayer, once a river that carried him effortlessly, now felt like dragging a bucket across dry ground. He opened his eyes, startled by how lost he felt among voices chanting in perfect unity. The monks around him radiated calm, their expressions serene, their breaths timed to the rhythm of ancient devotion. He envied them with a quiet desperation. For the first time in his monastic life, Aurelius felt alone in prayer. When the ritual ended, he remained kneeling a heartbeat too long, hoping the silence would crack and reveal some hidden meaning. It didn't. The silence remained whole, smooth, cold, and impeccably inscrutable. He stood, legs trembling slightly. Brother Elias gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Are you well today?" he whispered. Aurelius forced a smile that felt like stretching a cracked mask. "Yes, brother, just tired." Elias nodded sympathetically, though his eyes lingered a moment too long. Aurelius hated that, being seen when he felt so carefully unseeable. Breakfast was no kinder. The porridge was too warm, the bread too soft, the routine too familiar. All the little comforts of monastic life felt wrong, as if every virtue had soured just slightly, like milk left out a bit too long. Aurelius forced the spoon to his lips. The food tasted like obligation. He ate slowly, his thoughts circling him like uneasy birds. What is happening to me? Why does prayer feel hollow? Why does silence feel cruel? Why do signs contradict themselves? What shifted? When did it begin? Who am I now? The questions pressed against him, crowding his chest, making it hard to breathe. Brother Hilarius across the table noticed his distant gaze and frowned with mild concern. Mild because Hilarius's face had only two settings, stern serenity and mild concern. "You look troubled," he whispered. Aurelius blinked. "Do I?" Hilarius nodded solemnly. "Yes, troubled, or possibly constipated." Aurelius stared. Hilarius added with the calmness of a man deeply committed to precision. "It is difficult to distinguish spiritually." Aurelius nodded slowly. "Just a difficult morning." Hilarius made the sign of the cross over him. "For your bowels or your soul, whichever applies." Aurelius lowered his head, feeling the floor tilt beneath his certainty. After breakfast came labor, the great equalizer of monks and doubts alike. Aurelius swept the cloister walkway, but today the broom felt heavy, each stroke scraping loudly in the quiet morning air. The dust rose in lazy spirals, indifferent to his efforts. He watched it gather and scatter, unbothered by his attempts to impose order on it, much like his faith. He paused, leaning on the broom. "Lord," he whispered, "if you are near, let me feel something, even a whisper, even a crumb of warmth." Silence. Only the faint rustle of olive leaves overhead. He resumed sweeping, faster, harder, as though movement could outrun inner stillness. But every stroke only stirred the unease further. The courtyard, with its ancient stones and sunlit edges, felt suddenly too open, like a stage where the sky was watching. When it was time to work in the scriptorium, Aurelius hoped that routine might settle him. But the quiet room of ink and parchment offered no refuge today. He sat at his desk, dipped the quill, and tried to copy a passage on divine presence. The ink glistened, dark and smooth. But the words blurred. Not literally, his vision was fine, but spiritually, emotionally. The sentence he copied, "God is nearer than breath, nearer than light, nearer than your own soul," landed on the parchment with an almost mocking weight. Nearer than breath. He inhaled deeply, exhaled. He felt nothing except the cold air brushing the inside of his chest. Nearer than light. He looked at the candle flame. Still nothing. Nearer than his own soul. His soul felt like it was dissolving in the corners of the room. His quill trembled. Ink splattered, tiny black dots blooming across the parchment like spiritual bruises. He put the quill down. Brother Lucian at the next table looked up. "Are you well?" he asked, softly. Aurelius nodded. He had become so practiced at this lie, it was almost liturgical. Lucian's eyes softened. "Remember, brother, even the saints experienced dryness." Aurelius managed a small smile. "Yes, but at least saints wrote about their dryness." "True," Lucian admitted. "That must have been helpful." Aurelius returned to the parchment, but his hands continued trembling in that quiet, traitorous way the body has of revealing truths the mind refuses to name. By afternoon, his crisis had deepened into a strange fog, thick, disorienting, muffled. The monastery halls echoed strangely, the air felt heavy, and even the sunlight seemed to avoid him, choosing other monks who were less spiritually volatile. When evening prayer approached, Aurelius felt dread bloom under his ribs. He entered the chapel with slow steps, each footfall feeling like it belonged to someone else. The candles glowed along the walls, their light shimmering across stone arches like soft warnings. He knelt. His knees hit the floor with a thud that sounded too loud in his ears. The chant began, and something inside him snapped. Not a break, a bend. A deep, slow bending like an old wooden beam giving under weight. The words of the chant flowed around him like water he couldn't touch. He opened his mouth to sing along, but the sound caught in his throat. His breath shook. His chest tightened. A dull ache spread through his ribs. He felt like a man underwater, watching sunlight ripple above him, but unable to reach it. His hands trembled. His eyes stung. He bowed his head as if in prayer, but truly to hide the expression on his face, the one he feared would betray him to every monk in the room. For the first time in his life, Aurelius felt abandoned. By whom, he could not say. God? Himself? His own certainty? He didn't know. All he knew was that he was kneeling in a chapel filled with devotion and feeling nothing, nothing except the heavy, unbearable truth that something was breaking inside him. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly, when the final Amen echoed through the arches, Aurelius remained kneeling a moment longer, unable to rise. The silence after prayer pressed against him like a cold hand. He finally stood, weakly, unsurely, and left the chapel with steps that echoed like a man walking away from something he once believed would never leave him. He returned to his cell, closed the door, sat on his bed, stared at the candle. The flame trembled. He trembled. The air felt too still. The world felt too large. And inside him, faith hung by a thin, fraying thread. He whispered, barely audible, "I am losing myself." The words fell into the darkness like stones into a well, swallowed instantly by a silence that did not care. Night did not fall that evening. It seeped. It oozed in through the cracks between stones, sliding softly along the monastery halls like ink pouring over parchment. The candles burned low, their flames thin and tired, as if even fire had grown weary of giving light to this fragile world. Brother Aurelius sat on his straw bed, hands clasped loosely, head bowed not in prayer, but in a kind of defeated stillness. His thoughts, once orderly, disciplined, obedient, now moved in slow, disjointed spirals. Each turn brought a new ache, a new question, a new fragment of fear. He tried to pray. He whispered the first line of a familiar psalm, but the words tasted like dust on his tongue. He closed his eyes. Darkness pressed behind his lids, dense, expectant, almost curious. It was the kind of darkness that does not hide things, but reveals how empty the space truly is. The silence settled around him with unsettling softness. His breath trembled. He whispered into the air, "Lord," a word, a whisper, a breath, something, nothing. He bowed his head deeper, trying to humble himself into clarity, but humility, it seemed, had wandered off hours ago. The candle beside him flickered once, twice, then steadied. Aurelius lifted his gaze, eyes tired, heart aching. He felt it before he understood it. A shift, a presence, a weight. Something in the room had changed, not visibly, not audibly, but undeniably. A warmth stirred in the air, subtle and trembling. Aurelius inhaled sharply, feeling his heartbeat quicken like a startled bird. He wasn't alone. He couldn't explain how he knew, but he knew. Something unseen hovered near him, not close enough to touch, but near enough to command attention. Aurelius's breath hitched. "Lord!" The word escaped him, small and frightened like a child calling into a dark forest. The presence did not answer, but it also did not fade. It simply was, vast and still and impossible. The candle flame bent slightly, leaning toward him, though no breeze stirred. Aurelius rose slowly to his feet. His legs trembled. The air felt thick, almost heavy, as though saturated with meaning. He stepped forward, every movement uncertain, reverent, terrified. "Are you here?" he whispered. The silence deepened. Aurelius felt the presence gather, not as a figure, not as a voice, but as a sensation behind his ribs, a fullness pressing outward, a swelling ache rising in his chest. Tears pricked his eyes. He reached out his hand, though he knew nothing physical waited for him. His fingers brushed empty air, but something within him flinched, as if touched by something unseen. His breath broke into a sob. He sank to his knees. The presence pulsed. He closed his eyes and felt warmth spread through him, subtle, fragile, like the first stir of spring under melting snow. It was not comfort. It was not peace. It was something deeper, messier, almost painful in its intensity. Aurelius whispered, voice trembling, "Please, I'm lost. Speak to me." His words echoed faintly against the stone. The presence trembled, like a held breath. Aurelius waited, waited, waited. And then, like a candle pinched between two fingers, the presence went out, gone, vanished, as if it had never been there. Aurelius gasped, his chest collapsing inward. He fell forward, catching himself on his hands. The room spun. The candle flickered violently, struggling to stay alive. "No," he whispered. "Don't leave. Please, don't." Silence closed around him, cold and absolute. The warmth dissolved. The ache hollowed. The thread inside him snapped. He collapsed fully to the floor, forehead pressed against the cold stone, shoulders shaking. What came from him next was neither confession nor prayer. It was laughter. Soft, breathless, broken laughter. A laughter that carried the exhausted irony of a man who had spent years pursuing God with unwavering devotion, only to realize he had no idea whether the thing he chased was moving toward him, away from him, or simply circling him with a cosmic smirk. He laughed because his heart hurt. He laughed because nothing made sense. He laughed because the moment that felt closest to divine presence vanished before he could breathe it in. He laughed until he had no breath left. His laughter melted into quiet sobs he did not bother to hide. Darkness wrapped itself around him like a heavy cloak. The stone floor beneath him felt colder than ever. His entire being trembled in the aftermath of something he could not name. Was it God? Was it madness? Was it exhaustion? Was it hope, taking one last breath before dying? He did not know. He only knew that something had opened inside him. A space so wide and hollow, it echoed with every breath he took. When he finally lifted his head, the candle flame had steadied. Its small glow looked painfully ordinary. Aurelius sat up slowly, wiped his face with trembling hands, and whispered, "Nothing is more spiritual than a complete failure." The words hung in the air like a confession or a prophecy or a joke told by a sobbing monk. He crawled onto his bed, curling into himself like a man trying to keep his soul from falling apart entirely. The presence did not return. The silence did not break. The night did not offer comfort. but it stayed with him, soft, heavy, ancient, as he trembled in the dark. And deep within that trembling, faith cracked. Not shattered, cracked, the kind of crack that lets in cold, and sometimes light. Morning did not so much arrive as it hesitated its way into existence, like a shy guest unsure whether it had been invited. Light seeped slowly into Aurelius's cell, thin, gray, exhausted light that seemed to share his mood. It touched the walls timidly, creeping across the stone as if afraid to disturb whatever human wreckage lay there. Aurelius opened his eyes. For a moment, he did not know where he was. Then he remembered everything, every trembling breath, every flicker of presence, every echo of laughter and tears tangled together. He lay still, staring at the ceiling as if hoping it would write an explanation in the cracks between the stones. But silence said nothing. He sat up slowly, as though his bones had turned to wax overnight. His robe hung around him like something borrowed rather than something belonging to him. Even the air felt different, too thin, too still, too aware. He breathed in. The breath felt hollow. His body felt present. His soul felt elsewhere. He stood, feet touching cold stone. The floor's chill climbed into him with intimate precision, settling behind his ribs like a reminder of everything he had lost and everything that had never been his. He opened the cell door. The corridor outside was quiet, monastic quiet, the kind built from centuries of people whispering their fears into walls that learned to listen without judgment. Aurelius walked through it slowly, as though the hallway itself were fragile. Brothers passed him with gentle nods, unaware that something essential within him had cracked. They carried their prayer books, their tools, their serene expressions. They moved with that strange monastic grace, a combination of habit, discipline, and the fragile illusion that life was stable. But Aurelius felt none of it. He felt like a ghost wandering among the living. Not in a dramatic sense, in the soft, painful sense, a presence slightly misaligned with the world. In the chapel, he knelt as always. His knees touched stone, his hands folded automatically, his lips parted for prayer, and nothing came. No words, no longing, no ache, not even resistance. Just emptiness, smooth, polished emptiness. The chant rose around him, gentle and ancient. But for the first time it sounded far away, like something heard underwater. The melody washed over him without touching anything inside. He stared ahead blankly. He had always believed prayer was a bridge, one built from devotion, discipline, and trust. But today the bridge felt broken. Not destroyed, not shattered, just quietly disconnected. One end floating somewhere he could no longer reach. When the prayer ended, he rose with a slowness that trembled slightly. Brother Matthias touched his arm gently. "Peace to you, brother," Matthias whispered. Aurelius nodded. "Peace to you too," he tried to reply. But the words remained inside his throat, heavy and unwilling. Breakfast tasted like nothing. The porridge, once tolerable, now tasted like wet chalk pretending to be food. The bread felt dry in his mouth. The water tasted too clean, too empty. He ate mechanically, the way one copies scripture after losing the meaning of every word. Brother Lucian sat beside him, watching with quiet sensitivity, the kind of attention that monks train themselves to offer without intruding. "You look hollow," Lucian murmured. Aurelius blinked. A hollow laugh escaped him, quick, brittle. "Just tired," he whispered. Lucian nodded, though Aurelius could see he did not believe it. Lucian always saw too much. After breakfast came the slow march of duties, sweeping, copying, tending the garden. But each task felt unreal, as if he were performing someone else's routine. Sweeping no longer grounded him. Copying scripture felt like tracing over someone else's heartbeat. The garden smelled of rosemary and damp earth, scents he once loved, but now they drifted past him like faint memories. He kept working, because to stop would require acknowledging how lost he felt. He walked through the cloister garden, the sun casting long lines of light between the stone columns. In the center, the fountain bubbled softly. The sound once soothed him. Today, it sounded like someone gently mocking him. He sat on the fountain's edge, dipping 2 fingers into the cool water. It rippled, clear and empty. Aurelius watched the ripples spread, collide, and vanish. He whispered, to the water, to the sky, to himself, "I don't know what I am anymore." A leaf drifted past him on the surface of the water, a tiny, trembling thing. It spun slowly. Aurelius stared at it far too long. The leaf moved. The water moved. The world moved. He did not. He felt as though something inside him had been extinguished. Not violently, but the way a flame dies after running out of air. Quietly, inevitably. He walked back to the scriptorium in a haze. He sat at his desk, dipped his quill, and tried to write. The ink pooled on the parchment. Too dark, too wet. His hand trembled. The letters looked unfamiliar, the words meaningless. He put the quill down. The silence of the scriptorium pressed against him like a warm weight. Not comforting, not hostile, just present. He closed his eyes. Inside him, beneath the quiet shock, beneath the hollow ache, something strange stirred. Not faith, not doubt. Something between them. Something shapeless. Something raw. Aurelius whispered into the stillness, "What comes after this?" The stillness gave no answer. Hours passed like slow-moving shadows. The day dripped forward in moments that felt stretched thin. By evening prayer, Aurelius felt emptied beyond exhaustion. The candles in the chapel glowed with soft gold, their flames trembling with gentle devotion. He knelt again. The chant began. This time he didn't even try to join it. He simply listened, and for the first time the silence inside him did not feel like abandonment. It felt like a pause, a long pause, a pause waiting for something that had no name. After prayer, he stepped out into the courtyard. The sky was deep blue, the first stars brushing the darkness like hesitant sparks. He breathed in the cold air. It filled him, but did not anchor him. When he returned to his cell, he lit a candle, not for prayer, not for hope, but for company. The flame danced with soft movements, casting warm light across the room. Aurelius sat on his bed watching it. He felt the emptiness inside him with full clarity, a clean, echoing emptiness, like a freshly swept chamber waiting. He whispered, "This silence, it is not peace, it is not despair, it is something else." He didn't know the word. The candle flickered gently, as if waiting for him to name it. He didn't. He only sat there, breathing through the vast, quiet hollow that continued to open inside him. Not collapsing, not healing, just waiting. Night returned with the soft certainty of a practiced ritual. Shadows stretched across the monastery walls like long fingers of quiet memory, and the air grew cold enough to make even stone shiver. Aurelius stepped into his cell, closed the wooden door behind him, and let the darkness settle over him, like a cloak that knew him too well. He lit a single candle. Its flame rose shyly, trembling like a novice unsure of its calling. He sat on his bed, legs drawn close, hands resting loosely on his knees. His breathing was slow, steady, but thin, as if each inhale were borrowed from someplace distant. The silence that had haunted him for days now felt almost familiar. Not friendly, not comforting, just familiar, like a room whose emptiness you have learned to navigate without tripping. Aurelius pressed his back against the cold wall. He closed his eyes. And then, as gently as a whisper beneath the heartbeat, the moment arrived. Not a sound, not a light, not a voice. Just a shift. Like something in the room exhaled. He opened his eyes. The candle flame leaned toward him, not flickered, not wavered, leaned, but only by a fraction. Aurelius stared. "Lord?" he whispered. Or perhaps he only mouthed it. He wasn't sure. The flame straightened. Outside the cell, the wind brushed against the stone like a quiet thought trying to get in. Aurelius looked around, feeling that same subtle presence from 2 nights before, but weaker, or quieter, or perhaps simply disguised. He stood slowly. The floor felt colder than ever beneath his feet. He approached the candle. The flame grew thin, then thick, then thin again, like something breathing in its own strange rhythm. "Is this you?" Aurelius whispered. The flame swayed. Not clearly, not convincingly, but enough to make his pulse stumble. He knelt before the table, hands trembling softly. His throat tightened with the delicate pain of a man on the edge of a revelation too small to grasp and too large to ignore. He whispered again, "If you wish to speak, I am listening." Nothing. But in the nothing he felt a stirring, a soft, fragile shift inside his chest, a warmth, faint as a leftover ember hidden under ashes. He closed his eyes, hoping the warmth would grow. It didn't. Instead, something else happened. A sound, barely a sound, less than a sound. A soft tap behind him. He turned sharply. On the floor lay the pebble, the same pebble, the useless, uncooperative pebble. Now sitting in the center of the floor, far from the table where he had left it. Aurelius's breath caught. Had it fallen, rolled, moved? He moved toward it cautiously, as if the pebble were a small stony prophet. When he reached it, he knelt. He placed a trembling hand over it. The stone was warm, warm. Aurelius inhaled sharply. "Is this a sign?" he whispered. No response, not even an arrogant tremble from the pebble. He lifted it in his palm. The warmth faded. A faint, foolish disappointment filled him, too quiet to confess, too loud to ignore. He placed the pebble gently on the table beside the candle. He leaned closer to the flame, waiting for something, anything to reveal itself. The flame bent toward him, then away, then toward him again. Was it the breath of heaven? Or the draft under the door? He couldn't tell. He exhaled in a soft, bitter laugh. "Why must everything be ambiguous?" he whispered. "Is clarity too much to ask?" Silence. He lowered his gaze. His stomach growled. He froze. "Ah, hunger." He rubbed his forehead, half laughing, half weeping. "Have I mistaken hunger for holiness?" he murmured. His stomach, ever the honest companion, growled a second time in confirmation. Aurelius shook his head, exhausted, humiliated, relieved, disappointed. He looked at the candle again. "Was that all it was?" he whispered. "Just hunger?" But then the flame straightened, perfectly. Not a wobble, not a flicker. Just a thin, unwavering spear of golden fire. It stood still in a room with drafty, stone walls. Aurelius's breath stopped. He leaned closer. The candle's light softened at the edges, blooming in the air like a slow, glowing flower. The room grew warm, not hot, not uncomfortable, just warm enough to feel almost tender. Aurelius placed his hand over his heart. The warmth inside him grew too, slowly, gently, painfully, He whispered, "Are you here?" The silence thickened, and then, in the quiet between two of his breaths, something brushed his awareness. Not a voice, not even a word. More like the memory of a word. Faint, soft, impossible, real. Aurelius's eyes widened, his throat tightened. Was it God? Was it his imagination? Was it the delirium of hunger, loneliness, and spiritual exhaustion? He had no answer. His heart swayed like a loose branch in the wind. He whispered, "If this is real, let me feel you." The flame flickered. Aurelius froze. Again. Another flicker. But gentler, like a pulse, like breath. Then nothing. Stillness. The flame straightened once more, unwavering. Aurelius stared at it with the full force of a man desperate for meaning. Was it divine? Was it psychological? Was it coincidence? He didn't know. He didn't even know what he wanted the answer to be. He sank to his knees. His hands fell open at his sides. He whispered, voice breaking, "What do you want from me?" The silence settled around him once more, soft, full, heavy, ancient. It did not answer. But for the first time, the silence felt not empty, not cruel, just present. Present in a way he could not interpret, not yet, perhaps not ever. He lowered his head. A tear slid down his cheek. He whispered, "Lord, I don't know what this is." The candle flickered once more, light brushing across his face, then steadied. And Aurelius, trembling, exhausted, hollow and full at once, whispered the only truth he could cling to. Maybe. That is the point. The next morning emerged with a softness so fragile it felt almost guilty for existing. A pale wash of sunlight slid through the narrow window of Aurelius's cell, touching the floor in a thin, trembling line. Dust drifted lazily in the beam, each particle floating like a tiny monk practicing silent levitation. Aurelius sat on the edge of his bed, awake long before the bell rang. He felt different, not better, not worse, just differently aligned. As if something had shifted by a fraction of an inch inside him during the night, and now every thought, every breath, every movement resonated at a subtly new pitch. He touched his chest lightly. His heartbeat felt steady. Uncertain, yes, but steady. He stood, moved to the small table, and regarded the objects there, the extinguished candle, the dull glow of morning light on the wood, and the pebble, sitting quietly, as though waiting for an apology or an explanation. Aurelius lifted the pebble and turned it in his palm. Cold again. Meaningless again. Profound again. He placed it back down with a sigh that carried both resignation and strange affection. The monastery moved on around him. The walls breathed their ancient rhythms. Brother Ignatius coughed in the hallway. Someone dropped a loaf of stale bread in the refectory and then prayed about it. Life continued, stubbornly unbothered by spiritual crises. Aurelius walked through the corridor toward morning prayer. Each step felt softer than the last, as if he were learning to walk again. When he entered the chapel, the room was already filling with monks, their faces serene in that practiced monastic way that always looked like peace, but sometimes hid well-organized emotional chaos underneath. He knelt. His knees touched stone. The cold seeped up. The chant began. The voices rose, layer by layer, breath by breath, like the slow exhale of an ancient creature asleep beneath the chapel floor. Aurelius closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. He didn't expect clarity. He didn't expect comfort. He didn't expect revelation. What he felt instead was space, a small, silent spaciousness inside him, unlabeled, unclaimed, undiscovered. His breath settled into it, filling it gently. The chant built around him, steady, beautiful, indifferent. For the first time, that indifference did not cut him. It felt neutral, maybe even freeing. He opened his eyes. The candle flames in the chapel flickered, not as signs, not as messages, just as candles flicker. But the movement no longer stung him with uncertainty. It simply was. After prayer, Brother Elias approached him. His gentle eyes held quiet concern. "You seem calmer today," Elias said softly. Aurelius nodded. "I think I am. Or perhaps I am simply too tired to panic." Elias smiled, patting his shoulder. "That, dear brother, is a kind of peace." Aurelius allowed himself a small smile. Not joy, but softness. At breakfast, the porridge tasted exactly as terrible as always, but Aurelius ate it without resenting the universe for it. The bread was not burnt today, thanks, perhaps, to divine mercy, or the baker finally staying awake. Brother Lucian slid onto the bench beside him. "You slept?" Lucian asked. "Some," Aurelius replied. "Dreams." Aurelius hesitated, then shook his head. "No dreams." Lucian nodded. "No answers." "No," Aurelius whispered. "Just quiet." Lucian looked thoughtful. "That can be an answer, too." Aurelius didn't respond. He wasn't ready to believe that. After breakfast came the slow, steady rhythm of daily work. Sweeping the cloister stones, tending the herb garden, copying a passage about divine mercy. But beneath the routine, Aurelius felt something subtle, shifting, like a tide inside him turning in an unseen ocean. Not a return of faith, not the death of faith, just movement. He paused in the garden, fingers brushing rosemary leaves, breathing in their sharp, comforting scent. He whispered to no one in particular. "I don't know if you're close, or far, or watching, or ignoring me entirely." The plants did not answer. A bee buzzed nearby, aggressively uninterested in theology. Aurelius continued. "I don't know if last night meant anything, or nothing, or something in between." A silence settled between him and the rosemary bushes, a silence that felt neither divine nor empty, just quiet. He exhaled. "I suppose," he whispered, "I don't need the answer today." The words surprised him. They felt foreign in his mouth, but also strangely true. As he returned to the scriptorium, a faint warmth touched his chest, not certainty, not comfort, but acceptance. Not of what had happened, but of not knowing. He sat at his desk, dipped his quill, and began to copy new text. The words flowed more easily today, not because he believed them more, but because he wasn't fighting them. He wrote the phrase, "The mystery of God is not meant to be solved, but to be lived." He stopped, quill held midair. Was that true? He didn't know, but it felt right enough to continue writing. By evening prayer, the sky outside had turned to bruised lavender, soft and trembling. The chapel glowed with candlelight, the air smelling faintly of incense and day-old devotion. Aurelius knelt again. The chant rose again. The silence inside him opened again. But this time, the emptiness did not frighten him. It felt like a doorway, not a void. A doorway to nothing certain and everything possible. When prayer ended, Aurelius lingered a moment longer, staring at the candles, small flames trembling in the still air, doing their best. He whispered to them, "I suppose, so am I." He returned to his cell. Night greeted him with its usual stillness. The candle on his table waited, unlit, patient. He struck a flame. The candle flickered to life. Aurelius sat down, watching the small flame grow steady. He whispered, "If you ever wish to speak, I am here." And then, after a long pause, softer, "And if you don't, I suppose I am here anyway." The flame swayed gently, not as a sign, not as an omen, just flame being flame. Aurelius leaned back, breathing slowly. His heart felt tender, not healed, not broken, but open. Outside, the wind brushed against the stone like a wandering spirit unsure of its destination. Aurelius closed his eyes. Perhaps God was near. Perhaps not. Perhaps God was busy, or avoiding messages like everyone does on Mondays. A small smile tugged at Aurelius's lips. Uncertainty, it seemed, had its own quiet grace. And the night, vast and deep, held him gently in its arms, not with answers, but with space. Night returned as it always did, softly, inevitably, with the quiet patience of something ancient that had watched 1,000 monks wrestle with their souls before Brother Aurelius ever breathed his first prayer. The sky above the monastery stretched into a deep velvet darkness, thick enough to swallow stars and secrets alike. A thin crescent moon hung low, as if keeping its distance out of courtesy. Inside his cell, Aurelius moved with slow, thoughtful motions. He lit a single candle and placed it on the small table, watching its flame bloom into warm, trembling life. The room glowed in soft gold, shadows bending delicately along the stone walls like monks bowing in slow motion. Aurelius sat beside the light, hands folded loosely, posture calm in a way that was neither certainty nor resignation. Just presence, simple human presence. His breath rose and fell with an easy rhythm. For the first time in many nights, it didn't tremble. He looked down at the pebble, a small, ordinary stone resting in the center of the table. He reached out, letting his fingers brush its cool surface. There was no sign now, no impossible warmth, no hidden message, just stone, just earth. And yet, he lifted it carefully, cradling it in his palm. Not because it was sacred, not because it held meaning, but because it had been there, in the confusion, in the silence, in the strange, almost revelation that might have been divine, or delusion, or hunger, or simply the universe having a good laugh. It didn't matter anymore. He set the pebble down gently, as one sets down something that once frightened them, but no longer needs to. Aurelius leaned back, letting the wooden chair hold the weight of his tired spine. His gaze settled on the flame. It danced with small, determined movements, never steady, always trying, always trembling, and somehow managing to endure. A faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps, he whispered, faith is just learning to stay with the trembling. The candle crackled softly, as if acknowledging the comment. Outside, wind drifted past the window in a slow sigh. The monastery breathed its ancient breath. Somewhere down the hall, a monk coughed, Brother Ignatius, undoubtedly, then muttered a prayer about humility. The world moved on in its quiet, stubborn way. Aurelius folded his hands over his chest, feeling the soft beat beneath his fingers. That internal rhythm felt steadier tonight, not with certainty, but with acceptance. Not knowing had become something he could live with. He whispered into the dimness, Lord, if you are here, thank you for the silence. And if you are not, thank you for the longing. The words hung in the air like fragile incense smoke, rising, dissolving, becoming part of the room. He rested his head back against the wall, eyes half-lidded, letting the candle's glow wash over him in waves of soft amber. The night deepened. Shadows pooled. The flame burned on. It was the last thing awake in the room, standing guard like a small sun refusing to surrender its duty. Aurelius watched it until his vision blurred, until the line between fire and dream softened into a gentle haze. And for the first time in what felt like ages, he felt something close to peace. Not the triumphant peace promised in scriptures, not the confident peace of saints, not the easy peace of men who never ask too many questions, but a quiet, uncertain, honest peace, thin as candlelight, and just as miraculous. The flame wavered. Aurelius whispered, barely audible, "Stay with me a little longer." And it did. Soft, steady, warm. He breathed slowly, eyes drifting closed, the world narrowing to one small light, and the soft hush of night holding him gently. And as his thoughts grew drowsy and loose, he murmured one last ironic, fragile prayer into the flickering air. "If you ever choose to reveal yourself, I'll be here. If not, I'll still be here." The candle swayed, the shadows listened, and the night, immense, indifferent, sacred, closed around the monastery like a velvet curtain. Aurelius let sleep take him, softly, finally. The candle burned on, its flame steady, trembling, alive, the last witness of the day. And as the darkness deepened, as silence folded itself into every stone and breath, the story drifted to its end, not with certainty, not with revelation, but with the quiet truth that faith often lives in unanswered whispers and soft, flickering light. If you are still awake, or even drifting somewhere between dreams, listen closely now, because the last ember of the candle still burns, and it carries a small invitation, barely louder than a sigh. If this story kept you awake a little longer tonight, subscribe to Religious Night Stories, where faith never sleeps, even if you do.